Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. And here is our top story. Real estate prices are soaring, but is it a bubble? Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Deidre Willard. She is editor of millionacres.com. Deidre, so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us again this morning on the program.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yeah, so we're gonna do a different kind of show this morning. Let's talk about why, in the first segment, why this is a real estate bubble. Because people are seeing inflated prices. Not only are they seeing inflated prices in real estate, they're seeing inflated prices when they go to the gas pump, when they go to the grocery store, or when they're going out to build a home or maybe buy a new deck or build a new deck. So let's start with, how does this align with the bubble we saw in 2008?
The main way it relates to the bubble that we saw in 2008 is a sudden spike in demand and a sudden spike in prices, especially the pricing. Prices have been at a record high for existing home sales. It was 110 months in a row as of last month. So that's just incredible. And so that is making a lot of people concerned, because there is a question of how high can prices go. And when, prices can't go up forever. So when they do go down, is it going to be a bubble pop, or is it going to be like a slow release of a balloon?
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, just like in 2008, I guess 2006, 2007, really hard for first-time buyers to get a home, right? I mean, it's just in terms of inventory. I mean, as soon as people are building subdivisions, boom, they're getting picked up, right? Just like in 2008. I mean, there's just not a glut of inventory right now.
There's about 2.4 months of inventory of existing home sales based on NAR's last numbers. The thing that makes this most like a bubble for me is last time before the great financial crisis, we had this kind of lack of reason. And now you're sort of seeing this again, where there's such a scramble that people are ignoring the fundamentals, and they're doing things that are a little risky. So they're so desperate to get a home, and bidding wars are so intense. They're waiving contingencies. So they're like waiving a home inspection or those types of things. They're bidding $100,000 over the asking price. Some homes have sold in California for over $1 million over the asking price. That starts to feel really non-rational, and that makes it seem a little like a bubble to me.
Yeah, it is that irrational exuberance. If I remember Alan Greenspan being quoted to say, right? I mean, just inflation, just inflated prices, and it really feels like that to me. When I go out here in the Charlotte area and look at properties, there are a lot of people, by the way, moving to Charlotte, to North Carolina, from other. We've talked about this on the program with you and others. Just people coming from near and far want to be in the South, and they want to enjoy this beautiful weather, and good for them. So they're coming here, and it's really driving up cost. And I can't get past the fact that, looking back 13 years ago when I lived in New York, kind of the same thing. I think back to the movie The Big Short, and I go back to that was a great movie, by the way.
Yes.
And you think about people owning multiple homes and getting lent money for low interest rates, but with no income that they're showing.
Luckily, we don't have that situation this time. So that's something that we can talk about a little bit more, but we don't have that situation, and that's good news. But the frenzy feels irrational. It feels too much. And, when we've got a situation like this, it's sort of like the stock market. When things become very emotional, that's when those of us that have watched the market for a long time start to think, okay, this frenzy can't continue forever. So what does the next phase look like?
Yeah, and people running out to Home Depot and Lowe's and some of the other building companies to put on decks and add new ranges, and which, by the way, hard to get a new range today.
Yes,
or some
supply
of these new
chain
appliances,
issues.
because we have a supply chain issue with technology, semiconductors and silicone, et cetera. But it just feels like that. Like, okay, well, how do I sell my property, or how do I improve my property so that it inflates even more?
Well, that is another concern too, is that people tend to believe that things are only going to go up. It's just our human nature. So people are starting to renovate and put a lot more money in, thinking that, well, I'm always going to get my money back because this market is only going to go up. So you've definitely seen a massive uptick in home improvement, even as lumber prices go up and paint prices go up and seemingly every commodity is going up. People still think they're going to get their money back because housing prices are also rising.
Yeah, and Deidre, let's talk about mortgage loans for a second. Let's drill down on that because, again, and we'll talk about why it's not a bubble. But let's, people out there, we know there's some more scrutiny around income, but interest rates are low. They've creeped up a little bit in recent months, but
yes.
Mortgage rates are low, and you can borrow more to buy a home, one of these inflated price homes. You can borrow more for lower cost. That, to me, feels a lot like a bubble.
Well, that's one of the reasons that the uptick in housing prices hasn't quite squashed the market yet, is because money is so cheap. So that's really making it possible for people to pay these high prices. Interest rates probably aren't going to spike up, but they are going to go slowly up. And the interesting thing is that everybody who could refinance probably has, not everyone, but certainly refinance rates year over year, applications are starting to really slow down. So that shows us that all of the people who want to refi have probably figured out that they've gotten what they could get. Purchase applications are still going up, but eventually at some point as interest rates rise, we may see that start to fall off.
Yeah. Well, Deidre, I think we kind of successfully laid out why this may be a bubble. Let's take a quick break, and we come back, we'll talk to Deidre about why this is not a real estate bubble. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? They are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're joined this morning by Deidre Woolard. She is the editor of MillionAcres.com. Deidre, thanks for staying with us this morning.
Thank you. I'm excited for the next segment.
Yeah, so we laid out why this is a bubble. I'm sure hopefully people were taking notes and really kind of going through the machination in their head, thinking back to where they were in 2006 and 2007 and 2008 and what that looked like, what that felt like. Let's talk about why this isn't a bubble. And let's start with, I want to start with mortgage applications and how that process has really been a lot more rigorous when it comes to incomes and what you're earning and how it relates to what you're going to borrow.
Yeah, that is a big difference between now and the previous bubble. A part of that is just, at least in this case, we all learned something. And we learned that what they call the no-doc mortgage, where you don't really have to prove any income, that's probably not a good idea. So mortgages are much harder to get. The interest rates are low, but you do have to have a lot more qualifications, and you do have to be, credit worthy, and you have to prove it. So that is definitely different, and that is slowing down that sort of irrational, part of the market with people just being able to get a house with really no proof. And the other thing is there's not as much adjustable rate mortgages happening right now, and that's really good news. So in the previous bubble, you saw a lot of those adjustable rate mortgages. People got in at a monthly payment that they could afford, and then 2 or 3 years in, when the adjustable rate mortgage switched, they couldn't afford it anymore. That put a lot of people in a terrible situation, and it's still around, but it's such a small percentage of the market that it's nowhere near what it was before.
And you mentioned kind of that the income threshold really a lot more scrutinized. Let's talk about the credit score. That was a lot less important, I felt like, in 2006 and 2007 and 2008. Now, I mean, you've got to have a pretty decent credit score in the 700s with lack of default, lack of negative marks on your scores.
Well, and the interesting thing too is that people, I believe, are much more aware of what their credit score is these days, and much more attuned to what their credit is, how they can fix it. So I think there's a lot of education that has come up, that people are doing the homework on how to fix their credit score, which can take a little while sometimes, and they're ready before they jump in. So that is a good thing as well.
Let's talk about this appreciation of housing and the lack of not lack of demand, but lack of inventory. I had a conversation last week with Lawrence Yun, who's as you know, the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors, and we talked about autumn. He believes in autumn that supply will have increased a little bit. That is very different. And maybe there was really a lack of incentive back in 2008. Look, you built the subdivisions, you filled them up, and you went on to the next project. Kind of that feels a little bit different to me, that these soaring prices aren't always going to be there as the inventory begins to catch up.
Well, here's the interesting thing that I think is the core difference between 2008 and where we are now, and that is the rise of the iBuyers and the massive single-family rental portfolios. So you've got things like Invitation Homes, which came out of that crisis. They now have 80,000 single-family rentals across the United States. They want to add more. We've got build to rent as a thing. So home builders are building to sell, but also building to rent. Fundrise, which is one of the major real estate crowdfunders, they just raised $300 million from Goldman Sachs to buy whole communities, which they've already done with D.R. Horton and planning to do so with other home builders. So there's sort of a whole catch system underneath that. If we do have too much inventory, it'll go to the iBuyers, who will then sell it to these rental portfolios or things like that. So we're going to see a single family rental boom, partly because of the high prices. But it does mean that if there is excess inventory, it's not going to sit there. There are these other places that it can go.
And I'm thinking back to when I moved to New York in 2008 from Baltimore. I rented an apartment, and the rent was favorable. Now, I didn't live in Manhattan. I lived in Jersey City, a little bit back a ways from the waterfront, but that rent was a lot more favorable. When you take into account COVID and the pandemic, and eventually New York is going to reopen, like a lot of these big cities are reopening. I think they've slated July, if I'm not mistaken, for things kind of coming back. I would think that right now rents might be very attractive in the New York area and some of these cities, trying to entice people back. But would you see that appreciate, and maybe that this inverse kind of relationship where rents start to go up again? Maybe there's a little bit of a declination or a leveling off of real estate prices as the inventory improves.
Definitely. New York is an interesting case. We're starting to see rents tick up there, starting to see them tick up a little bit in San Francisco as well. There's still a lot of concessions, and it is absolutely still a great time if you want to lock in a good lease in New York City. But this interest in single-family rentals is partly also connected to that remote work boom. And you mentioned earlier, people moving to Charlotte. Charlotte has probably more single-family rentals than, they're building things downtown, but not as much. So, and you've still got this idea that people want a house. And so that is part of what's fueling this.
Yeah, the other thing I think very different is, let's talk about millennials. They are the largest generation, right, that are in the workforce. I think the oldest millennials are now approaching their 40s or going to be turning 40, which is, geez, I mean, it just makes me feel...
Makes us all feel a little old.
It's aging me. It's as I'm approaching my 50s, it's aging me. But really, that's a big difference. You had, my generation, Gen X, we were kind of the homeowners, 13, 14, 15 years ago. Now we've got this new generation. That's really going to change the dynamic as well.
Oh, absolutely. Because Gen X, we're sort of sandwiched between this massive boomer generation and this massive millennial generation. And like the boomers, the millennials are changing things as they go. You see that with a large population cohort. So what do they like? They like turnkey. They don't like to do a lot of work. I mean, not everyone. Certainly some millennials are interested in DIY and things like that, but not all of them. And so they want different things. And they also want different types of communities. They're very interested in walkable communities. They want to be able to go to restaurants, go to the grocery store, things like that. They want that, what they call the 15-minute city, where you can access everything really nearby. And the interesting thing has been watching how that is changing some smaller cities. Even smaller cities that kind of developed as a bedroom community are now sort of adding in a little bit of an urban core.
Well, Deidre, I think we dispelled the myths. I think we popped the myths, I guess I should say, related to a potential real estate bubble. Thanks again for joining us. And look, we look forward to having you back on again to the program very soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited, and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.